Hello, I'm Francisco and this is Whaaat, the show where you can actually replay what I say in history class. Now we talk about money, honey. Lots of money, oil, and yes, maybe a little bit of freedom and equality. This video is about capitalism, liberalism, and Adam Smith's ideas about capitalism and liberalism, especially their real-life applications in the history of the United States from the 1870s to about the 1930s. Yes, I'm talking about Adam Smith, the one that thought that people were smart enough to make the right decisions for society as a whole and keep their whole economy afloat. Spoiler, nope. Let's begin with some background. Since their independence in 1776, the United States has had full liberal ideas. They wanted liberty to do as they pleased with their private property, they wanted straight white males to run the government, they wanted the right to act as individuals without anyone telling them what to do, which sounds nice if applied correctly. Around the same time, but in Scotland, Adam Smith was coming up with ideas to understand the money system and possibly make it more humane. There's more information in the description below, but Adam Smith's ideas may be summarized in 3 recommendations. 1. Let the free market be free. Sure, Adam Smith believed in making capitalism more humane, but he also believed that a lot of the problems with capitalism would just solve themselves if you let things flow. This is the famous invisible hand that capitalism would use to regulate itself. 2. Specialization is good. Adam Smith noticed that capitalism makes the economy more specialized, which makes everyone richer. So he recommended that it was the boss's responsibility to make sure that people saw how good specialization was for them, as well as not losing sight of the meaning of their work. And 3. Respect for consumerism and the rich. According to Adam Smith, consuming products keeps the economy moving, but luxury creates the surplus wealth that allows society to take care of its poor and its needy. He said that instead of taxing them or making them feel guilty, society should manipulate the rich into spending this surplus money on people that needed it to improve their own society. And this should be done by giving the rich the high status and respect they crave, and at the same time educating consumers to want better things and pay the right price for them. Keep in mind that this was being published around the same time that Americans were declaring their independence and inventing a new country that did not want to pay taxes or have a king. So it's really no surprise that they were like,
yep, sounds great.
And we really do have to hand it to the Americans that, like John Green says, they were the first to create a society where no one was superior to anyone else at first glance. You know, except for slaves, but then they fought the Civil War over that. And women, but you know, that problem goes away. When the United States reached some stability after the Civil War was fought and the difficult period of Reconstruction was ending, the economy began to grow and specialize incredibly fast. Wages grew and became a lot higher than the ones in Europe. This caused an influx of immigrants into the United States, which also helped because it meant more people were available to work. Nevertheless, it also caused some serious problems. The economy was extremely deregulated, which means that if you were an American company in the 1870s, there were no rules. Like Adam Smith recommended, the free market was very free. You have an innovation in mind and want to manufacture it to sell it? Go for it! You want to sabotage your competition to be the only one selling a specific product and at an exorbitantly high price? Do that too, monopolies are legal. This period is called the Gilded Age because, like a gilded decoration, which on the outside looks golden but in the inside is pretty cheap, the United States from the outside looked like prosperity and wealth was reaching every corner of the country. And yes, if you look at books like The Age of Innocence, American high society starts to look eerily similar to a European high society, except maybe with more money. The rich in the United States were definitely getting the high status that Adam Smith recommended, except life wasn't so good for the rest of the Americans. Deregulation also meant labor conditions were awful, including things like constant child labor, debilitating work-related illnesses and injuries, and the forming of a class system? Because you can bet that if there's a lot of money in a society, it'll be used for the rich to handle the government as they see fit. The Gilded Age was a golden age for corruption. XOXO. As American politics, particularly at the local level, were managed by political machines like Tammany Hall in New York City. What was their purpose? To make the rich richer. What was their weapon of choice? Embezzlement, bribery, and graft. This type of politics gave way to a series of conservative policies in the United States, such as segregation. Segregation was the separation of American society along racial lines, for access to things like education, healthcare, water, transportation, voting, and pretty much everything else. What does this mean? That the American government decided to have 2 of everything. One education system for white people, one education system for black people. Bathrooms for white people, bathrooms for black people. Drinking fountains for white people, drinking fountains for black people. The Supreme Court ruled that both facilities should be separate but equal, but it did not say anything about their maintenance. This means the ones for black people were invariably worse. On one hand, the public objective of segregation was to protect public morality, just think of the children, that sort of thing, but the real objective was to keep rich white people rich. Because if black people and other racial minorities can be prevented from participating in society, guess who keeps the upper hand? Unlike what Adam Smith recommended, the bosses and the rich in the United States were not spending their surplus money on improving their societies. They were actually maybe doing the opposite of that to make themselves richer. I don't know, somehow that kinda sounds like what's going on in the United States right now. But anyway, on the plus side, there was a progressive backlash against these circumstances, which we call, predictably, the Progressive Era. This stage in American history includes hugely important investigative reporting by journalists called muckrackers, who literally went into factories and reported about the awful conditions they saw. American politicians at this point resembled more Henry James Waternoose III than people. So progressives actually went against the political machines to gain back power from them. They did this by regulating industries through antitrust laws, which were meant to prevent monopolies. They promoted women's vote in an attempt to extend democracy and allow the other 50% of people to vote. They banned alcohol, which was what we call Prohibition, in an attempt to take back control of the cities from saloon owners, or because they thought they had to protect society from the immoral consequences of alcohol. Not very clear. And they instituted some weird new variations on their own government, which Adam Smith would not have seen coming, like mechanisms for direct democracy, where people make direct decisions in their own government without electing anyone to represent them, and scientific management, which uses the scientific method to improve effectiveness, efficiency, and specialization in industrial work. And then World War I happened. We're not going to go into it in detail in this video, but the point is that while the United States did not have the most significant involvement in the First World War, it was definitely there, and the war definitely changed the game for American society and its economy. On one hand, industry and economic competition grew, which meant specialization and the free market, like Adam Smith predicted, became more and more important. The war effort in the United States meant that things had to be produced quicker and better, and that people needed to consume them. This led to a newfound emphasis on credit and consumerism, or what we also may call the American way of living. That is, what does it take to behave like a real American? Not having a specific religion, or speaking a specific language, or having a specific type of job, or being educated in a certain way, or having certain beliefs about government. It's to own things. Property. To buy them yourself, preferably on credit, and lose sight of how you technically don't really own it if you borrowed money to get it. Both these elements are present in, yes, the roaring 1920s. It was a wonderful time for the United States. Economic prosperity could actually be seen from a distance. Cars, radio, cinema, aviation, luxury, shorter dresses, hats, canes, swing, and jazz. If Adam Smith saw it, he would probably say that the 1920s were kind of like the 1770s, but better. Because the market was larger, luxury was reaching more people through movements like Art Deco, and more people were consuming everything there was to consume, even on credit. Everything was great, until it wasn't. Why? Because, as you may already be thinking, this was actually a very unstable situation, economically and socially speaking. The thing about the Great Depression is, to look at it, we actually have to separate it into two things that happened one right after the other. One of them, the more famous one, is the stock market crash that happened on October 29, 1929. Also known as Black Tuesday, in which traders sold 12.9 million shares of stock in one day in a frenzy, and the stock prices fell 23% in 4 days. This situation affected the richest of the rich, who were the people investing in the stock market. But what we actually know as the Great Depression is how after the stock market crash, or a little before if you worked in agriculture, unemployment rose to the roof, banks could no longer sustain the credit-based economy that had seemed great during the 1920s, and people experienced horrible economic hardship. The reasons for this are complicated. But one thing that Adam Smith may not have seen coming is that a free market is an uncertain market, and when uncertainty is high, people freak the out. Credit and loans are great, while the people giving them have some certainty that they'll be paid back. But if they get scared, for example by a frenzy in the media, a bad crop season, or a bank closure, everything goes wrong. The main thing to keep in mind here is that the stock market crash in 1929 and the Great Depression are not the same thing. One affected corporations and the rich, the other affected everyone else. Economic crises actually seem to be a huge part of free market capitalism, but that's more Karl Marx than Adam Smith. On that note, this is where we leave off. Fortunately, nowadays things are super different to what we talked about in this video. Oh right, this video was made with the help of my assistant, Rangel. Thank you, Daniel. I hope you learned something. See you next time.